Hi, good evening everybody. Thanks for coming down here on this very hot evening. We lucked out, it didn't rain this evening. They predicted rain for the last 3 weeks, but luckily we didn't get it tonight. I desperately need rain at my house, so as soon as we leave tonight, I'll want the core down. I'm looking forward to rain. All right, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have a brief business meeting, and then we're going to have Dr. Hackett talk to us about the log cabin. And I have been intimately involved with this building since 1978. So I was involved with getting it moved from Alexandria to the park, and from the park down to here. So I've been involved with it for years, right? So I have a very close connection with this building. All right, we're going to start out tonight with our business meeting first. So we're going to call on Steve Bannister to give us our treasurer's report.
Started with a balance of $16,943.36. It was a bad month for money coming in and a bad month for money going out. We took in $276.67, but we spent $1,422.60. Most of that went because the maintenance agreement on the copier was due, which was $580, and our insurance policy was due, which was $566. The rest of the money was just money spent on all the work that we're doing up in the museum up there. So we wound up with a balance of $15,797.43. Now, and a part of that, keep in mind when we do that, that $3,210 of that is our scanner fund. Okay, we're still trying to collect money for our new scanner. And we have also established an additional fund to help offset some of the cost of the essay contest that we do every year. We had great participation in that this year, and we want to see that continue to grow. And so we had a contribution for that as well. So,
the meeting was held last month at the Newport Public Library. The speakers for the evening were Robert Ingalls and Ted Harris, who gave a talk on the Southgate African American School in Newport. In the treasurer's report last month, Steve reported we had $16,943.46. Our membership as of last meeting was 240. Jan reported that the newsletter will be out at the end of August. It was reported that the History Day event will have to be moved next year, but to a location that has yet to be identified. Marvin gave a report on the cemeteries, talked about Saddle Ridge Cemetery, which is still being looked at. Mike gave a report on the Evergreen Cemetery. There was a Friends of the Evergreen meeting that took place, and they were still looking for members and caretakers. Photo albums, we had 6,484 photos that had been scanned in. Ken reported that the picnic at Frederick's Landing was crowded this year, and we're looking at an alternate site for next year. One of the places that's being considered is the Cold Spring City Building Park. And the sign out in front of the courthouse, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but Ken had that revamped so that it's easier to read. We've got bold, bright letters on there now. It makes it a lot easier to read. And that's pretty much it.
Membership for anybody here that's not a member is only $12 a year. We also have business memberships and technology sponsors for $50 a year, and you get a little ad in our newsletter. So we can always use new members.
If you've tried to get a hold of us at the Historical Society office for the past 2.5 weeks, you didn't do it. Because behind our building is this giant tower for the police department. Well, every once in a while the lightning, instead of hitting that, hits our building. It cooked all kind of stuff. Phones and all kind of stuff. So for 2.5 weeks we've been out of business. They've been in there umpteen times trying to clean up the mess. And as of this week, most everything is back working, and we've replaced things that got burned up. So the big tower in the back usually takes the strike, but this time the building got it as well. So we've been fighting around with that, but it is fixed. So if you're trying to get a hold of us, call us now. You should be able to get through. Okay, we're going to do a brief reports, gifts and donations. Richard.
Shadler donated several tokens to local companies, including the Short Rate Bridge at Pass and just other local taverns. A couple programs from the 92-93 Frogtown Music Fest, an old bag from the Bank of Alexandria, a numbered print of the Big Mac Bridge, and a Cold Spring Volunteer Fire Department badge. And then just this last Saturday, he brought up a collection of arrowheads found on the family farm or around the family farm in Persimmon Grove, and as well as a few pieces of ones. Two of the old rock pestles that you can see where they used to grind corn with, and on the bottom you can see the indention where it was actually used, and an old camera. And that's the only donations we've got the last few weeks.
Okay, thank you. Anything new on picture albums?
No, we're moving forward. Glenn and I are working to index all of the gray negative collection, and we're making some progress on that. And I'm collecting boxes. We finally found a way we're going to put all of those negatives in boxes and get them all labeled appropriately now that we have them all in, and make it easy to find them, easy to pull them off the shelf, easy to put them back where they go. So that's all in progress.
On US 27, they retired, contacted us and asked if we wanted their negatives. Turned out it was 500,000 of them. And it filled my truck to the top. I only realized months later I still didn't have them all. I had to go back a second time. So we're in the process of trying to get a microfilm reader that will read the negatives and print out. So if somebody was married in 1956, we can get a copy of their wedding for them and sell them a copy. So we have lots and lots of negatives. So it's quite a collection. We probably have nobody else in the state of Kentucky has anything close to what we have. Jan, what's the next issue coming out?
I did say last month that the newsletter would be out at the end of August. But Ken alluded to the little lightning strike problem that we had with our equipment. And we didn't realize it when everything else was getting fixed. But when I sat down Tuesday to start running some of the pages of the newsletter, our laptop and PCs are not talking to the copier. And Glenn, one of our board members who is a technology guy, and my husband both came to the same conclusion. It's not our PCs or our lines going to the copier, it's the copier. We think that the storm blew a board of some kind in the copier. So we do have a call in to DSC Systems who do the copier, that we have the contract with, and they are coming, sending someone Thursday, we hope. Tuesday, yes, this coming Tuesday. I'll be going on vacation. So as soon as I get back and it's fixed, I'm going to be running that newsletter, and hopefully you'll have it the first week of September.
Correspondence or emails?
Yeah, we've had some queries come in, people looking for things. Had a lady call just the other day, and a man, they were looking for something, and I didn't really recognize what they were saying, but they gave me the name of the person. It was a military record. And so I went to our military files, and I put my finger right on it. It was so easy. Thank you, Pam. Now that we have those files organized and alphabetized, I went right to this man's name and found the form. They came out and got it. Unfortunately, it didn't have the name of the guy's grandparents, but he was glad to get it.
These batteries are free. They're for hearing aids in case some of you need hearing aids. They were given to me through an organization of senior citizens in Cincinnati. And I think it was an advertising thing, but I got a whole bag full of them up there. These are P13, if that's the kind you use. Feel free to take about 100. And there is water that you may take with you later on this evening if you get thirsty or whatever, or drink it now. But as far as cemeteries are concerned, we've had an unusual thing happen that doesn't normally happen. Normally people are trying to hide cemeteries, they're trying to take it off of the deed. We've encountered a guy that's got an old cemetery on his property. It's called the Cherry Cemetery. It's on Persimmon Grove. And he decided that since his father had taken care of that cemetery for so many years, he had him dug up, for whatever word that is, and reinterred on the family ground. And then in the process he found This has never been excluded from his deed, so he wants to have it excluded. So he's asked Buck and myself to come out and kind of point out what we think the real cemetery is, and then he's going to have a surveyor kind of lay it off. And so once in a while you get a jewel. Tonight you get free batteries and water. And I was happy when a guy wants to record a cemetery. Thank you.
Okay. Veterans room, as Pam redid, it looks great. We have thousands of veterans. We probably have the biggest collection of county veterans of any county in the entire state of Kentucky. And Pam's now in charge of it, so stop up sometime and see that. The camera collection, the hallway has been redone. We redid the pictures above it of the 4-mile Camp Springs stone houses. It's quite an exhibit. You should stop up and see that when you get a chance. We're busy renovating our museum and our library office. We worked up on Saturday. I've been up there umpteen times off and on. So a lot of work's being done. We're going to have an open house eventually to invite everybody back up to see what we've been doing. And we're trying to downsize things that have nothing to do with Campbell County, and then so we collect more of Campbell County artifacts as opposed to counties throughout the whole state, which we don't really have a direct connection to. So we're working on that. We're going to be at the Senior Citizens Picnic on Thursday, September 22nd. So stop by our booth if anybody wants to help work that night for the Historical Society. Let me, or that day, not night. Let me know, and we'll sure get your name written down. We can use some help. We had over 100 years worth of DAR magazines that were given to us years back. We couldn't find an index for it, so as we've been downsizing, the decision was made. We tried to send them on. So the Boone County Public Library came and filled the back of their car with them, so now they're over there. So if you want DAR magazines for any reason, go over there. They didn't have a direct connection to Campbell County without an index. They really weren't usable for us, so that's why we've got rid of them. Backroads Farm Tour went well. I had 300 people in my place, so I think everybody else was very pleased with it. It didn't rain for the first time in 4 years. The Spears Hospital collection is being not moved, but worked on, so you can come up and see that. Battery Hooper Day is August 20th, 21st, is that right?
Right. Next Saturday and Sunday. Starts at noon on Saturday, 1 on Sunday. Free admission, free parking. Lots of cool stuff just over at the Raymond Museum in Fort Wright, all 5 of them.
Okay. Anybody who's ever eaten at O'Charlie's in Cold Spring realizes the store has been revamped and redone. All the pictures in there came from us. So they gave them all back to us. So if you have any pictures you're dying to have hanging on Old Charlie, come see us. We have a pile of pictures in our library now that came from there. So if somebody's dying to have a picture of Grandpa in a bib overalls, come get it. We'll give it to you. Future meetings. September the 8th, we're going to meet down at Wilder City Building. The last on-air disc jockey from WNOP, Mark Slapner, is going to come and talk about Radio Free Newport, the one that was floating in the Ohio River. On October 13th, we're going to be at Newport City Building. We're going to have a talk on George Wiedemann by Dr. Don Tolsman from the University of Cincinnati. We're going to participate in the Camp Springs Herbst Tour on the 16th of October. On November the 10th, we're going to have a retired police chief from the city of Southgate come talk to us about his experience at the Beverly Hills Fire. December the 8th, well, backtrack. November the 10th is also our election night for trustees, our board of directors and officers. December the 8th, we're going to have our Christmas meeting, and that's going to have the Hills of Kentucky Dulcimers. I have January booked for Wilder City Building. We don't have a topic yet. In February, we're going to have Bridget Stryker come from the Boone County Public Library and talk to us about the Underground Railroad. Underground Railroads is a much misunderstood topic, because everybody assumes that any building in Campbell County that had a basement and a tunnel coming out of it was part of the Underground Railroad. 99.99% had nothing to do with the Underground Railroad at all. It was just something that everybody's old house had. So she's going to come and talk about that for us at the Wilder City Building. And finally, March the 9th at the Wilder, we're going to have a Marietta Keneal who's a life member of the VFW in Alexandria, come talk to us about VFW and all their workings and everything that involves that organization. Okay, now, the main reason we're here. We came here to hear about a talk about the log cabin here, and I'll have some stuff to add to it eventually. So Dr. Hackett, turn it over to you.
Thank you for all coming out and sweating with me. I figured this is all exercise because we're sweating and we're outside. Otherwise, we'd probably be inside enjoying air conditioning. I have some little bit of written histories here to help pass these out or get these passed around. This cabin was moved to this property in about 1982. It was brought to show how far we've gone from the one-room schoolhouse to the major university. And that's why it was brought here. It was meant to be a showpiece for the university. That didn't last very long. It was a very difficult property to use. It wasn't accessible. It was turned over to the library. They used it briefly for exhibit space, but for the most part, the building was shuttered up and left behind. So about 2012, I took a group of students up here to come look at a building like this. Now, in my past life, I was a museum director. I've been a director for county historical societies in Ohio and in Minnesota. And so I know one of the things that challenges historical societies is the fact that people like to give you buildings, or they like to offer you buildings. If I had $1 for every time I got a phone call that said, I've got a log cabin on my property and I don't want to tear it down, but it's in my way of my new house, can you come and get it? Or, we're a city, we're building on this new airport, we have a historic house, we don't know what to do with it, let's call the Historical Society. And that's always a good thing because as you guys know, historical societies are always very flush with cash. And sure enough, you always are given the things that nobody else wants. So usually you get into a building, the plumbing doesn't work very well, the electrical doesn't work very well, and so on. So this building was moved here with no really clear idea how it was going to be used. And so the building, it was open for a while, and as you know, having a property that isn't properly watched over all the time within sight of dorms, with students who are learning to drink for the first time, is probably not the best idea. So what happened was that somebody broke out the windows. So it was decided that they were going to shutter it up. And so rather than spend a lot of money on it, they bought some plywood and they made kind of looking things that looked like shutters, and they boarded it all up. And if you've ever had a house or a property, a barn, a shed, or whatever, that isn't taken care of or watched all the time, you get residents moving in. And we got residents moving in the form of raccoons. So when I brought the students up here in 2012, my thought was to pose a question. Here you are, the director of a historical society, and you have just been given a building. What are the first things that pop through your mind? What do you need to do first? And that's the question I ask my students. If you were given a building like this, what was the first thing you think you ought to look at? Anybody know? Liability. Liability's a good one. The roof. Who said roof? Yay! Why the roof? Exactly. And that's what I told them. A building can sit idle if it has a good roof. If it doesn't have a roof, it's going to fall apart. So we started walking around, and I have some history with log structures. I've actually worked on 2 others prior to this one. And as we walked around the building, we noticed something. This building had a unique feature to it. Its top was leading toward the west, and its bottom was leading toward the east. And then somewhere in the middle there was a twist. So we were concerned. And part of the problem was that our logs had rotted out. And that was because the chinking that they used, this stuff here is called chinking, was improperly, they used an improper formula. And what they had used was Portland cement. Portland cement is the same stuff that they use on sidewalks. And what do you know about Portland cemented sidewalks? They're hard. They're not very flexible. For any of you that ever remember learning how to skate, remember those old skates you used to put on? You know, and people of our generation have knee scrapes. Okay, well, that's concrete. Concrete doesn't expand and contract. It is very unforgiving. Where wood is a lot softer. It is very forgiving. And so when the sun comes up, hits the cabin, the logs want to stretch, and the concrete doesn't. So you start getting gaps that fill up, that open up. And in those gaps you get water. And you get critters. And you get all sorts of things that love to go in there and eat that wood. And the thing about a log cabin, all the strength of the cabin is in the corners. These don't carry any weight. These carry weight. As they rot out, that's what causes the cabin to fall. So we came out here on that date and we walked around and I said, this is going to fall on somebody someday. We're going to have to do something. And another thing that you learn as a museum director is that you always get this phone call from somebody after a building's been torn down, and they'll say, why didn't you do something to save that building? You could have done something. When I was director of the Historical Society of Dayton, Ohio, I got the call about the Lazarus building. I don't know if anybody, you remember Shelto's or Reich's? There was this Lazarus building that was built in the 1890s. It was a real big, one of the world's first department stores. And it was right in the middle of downtown Dayton. And it sat vacant for as long as I was a museum director there. It was 12 years that nobody did anything with this building. And it was massive. It was 500,000 square feet. Well, the city decided to develop the whole area. And it's where the Performing Arts Center is now, if you've ever been in Dayton. Okay? So they tore down this building. And the very next day I get this phone call from this woman that's really, really angry. And she is giving me the riot act. She's telling me, how could I let them do that? How could I let them tear down this building that was such a part of her memory? And I said, yeah, I'm sorry, ma'am, it's a little out of our control. I don't have the $25 million it would take to fix it up. And I said, oh, by the way, when's the last time you shopped in that store? Oh, it's been 30, 35 years. And you wonder why they closed. So anyway, that long story short, so I wrote a letter to the university and I said, look guys, this is going to fall down. And if it falls down, somebody's going to call the history department and say, why did you let that fall down? And I said, you could tear it down and get rid of it, or we could fix it up. Now there's pluses and minuses to it. Tear it down, lay grass down, you can forget the whole thing. But this house has a legacy. It means something to the history of this community. And if you can sit back and treat the history of a community with such abandon, then what value do you have? Our history tells us who we are and where we've come from. Correct? Well, so they said, you're right. We got to fix this building up. But we're used to handling these concrete monstrosities. Over here, we don't know anything about log cabins. So what we did is we decided to build a class around it, a history class. It was going to be a history class. We're going to learn about log cabins. We're going to talk about how they were built, what they mean to America, and specifically, what do you do to save a log cabin? And we wanted to sort of bring this back to historical significance so they could be used again. And this is another thing I learned as a museum director. If people are not connected to their history, it's easy to get rid of it. It's easy to forget it. So our first and foremost goal in this project was to make this building usable. Make it part of the campus again. And I'm glad to say that's what we're going to do with it. This is going to be the only log cabin in the state of Kentucky that I know of that isn't a private residence that's going to have Wi-Fi in it. That's so that professors can bring their students out here and have a class outside to study gardens, to study nature, to learn poetry, to study science. This is going to be a laboratory for them to use. It'll just be like any other building on campus and be available to anybody that wants to use it, as well as people in the community. That way, if it gets damaged again, somebody's going to report it. Somebody's going to turn it in. Somebody's going to complain about it because it's going to be important. So, what do we have to do? Well, we started by doing an inventory of each and every log. We did an inspection. We did a report looking at all sides of the cabin. Every log was individually numbered and individually assigned a status. How good was it? How bad was it? And what we determined was about 30% of the logs in this building were unusable. They had gotten to the point where they were so bad that you could actually take your hand and push it through the log. Because a lot of them were empty because they had rotted out from the inside. Another thing that we determined was that we had to get rid of the chinking. The chinking was the problem. It didn't expand and contract like modern materials or even materials that our ancestors used. Our ancestors did not use Portland cement. They used a mixture of lime mortar. And that's why you get really old houses, you go out there and the lime, the space between the bricks, the mortar gets soft. You can scrape it out because you want something that's going to give. Plus, your ancestors had a hell of a lot more time on their hands to fix things when they were broken. We don't have that luxury anymore. So, we had to look for a material that would look good and have a long-term durability. And what we came up with is this stuff called permachink. And it's kind of like a rubber. It looks good. I mean, it can be dyed any color. It looks like it belongs. But what's nice about it, it's very light, and it's very strong, and it's very flexible. So, this is a permanent fix, and not something that has to be fixed all the time. So that's something we decided. We made the judgment call. I gave the university the formula for traditional chinking, and I gave them this idea, and they went this way because of cost. But that's okay, because we're not going to use it as a living place. We're not going to use it as a one-room schoolhouse anymore. It's got to be a space that's usable and maintenance is low. Okay? Another problem we ran into is the windows. Sometime in the history of this building, they took the windows out and they enlarged them. And in fact, these windows are actually too large for this building. The windows that were here when we started working on it were about 20 to 30% larger than these. So they extended way out. Not only that, they were casement windows. They opened like this. And I will give you $100 if you can find me a 19th century log cabin that had casement windows. They didn't have them, they didn't exist. So what we did is we went back with 6/6 windows. And we determined that because in the research that we did on the cabin, we determined this building was built about 1849. And when the Gosneys built it, it originally had 2 stories. Actually, a story and a half. So it had a story and a loft. And there was something else that gave us a clue about its building date. If you look at log cabins, and this is kind of like a feature of log cabins, and nobody can give you a real explanation about it, but you're always going to see, especially on the inside, holes. And they're going to be about an inch and a half, and they're going to go in about 5 or 6 inches into the log. You know, people theorize, oh, they were where steps were, or where they had built-in cabinets. I've even heard one log cabin expert say that what you did is you gave the kid who was bothering you while you're working an auger, and you said, here, go do something, and the kids drill holes in the logs. But inside one of those holes, somebody had taken a piece of dress, a woman's dress, and shoved it in the hole, along with a button. and it was kind of a brownish yellow dress with a real nice early glass button, which I sent to a friend of mine who was a textile expert and told me that dates about 1850. So that helped confirm the building of this building. So we decided that between 1830 and about 1860, the chosen window style for houses, even log cabins, was a 6/6 window arrangement. That's 6 panes over 6 panes. And so if you look at it, if you looked at the cabin before we started to work on it and now, it looks a lot better. It looks a lot more period correct. We continued to go with a larger window even though we shrunk these down because we wanted as much natural light to get in as possible. Our ancestors, of course, had no electricity. And then before the mid-1830s, they didn't even have oil lamps. So most things were candles, or they were camphoine lamps, or something. But they were single burner lights, a little better than candles. So people maximized the use of windows for light. And if you have an old house that was built in the first half of the 19th century, and if you went inside it, if it was brand new, you would see that people would have had their furniture arranged differently than we do. They would be oriented toward the windows as opposed to being in the center of the room because that's where the light is. Okay, so it's a very different arrangement. But we wanted to keep these open as much as possible. We also wanted to use a simple device for raising and lowering, so that we could get air through, since we're not going to have any heat or any air conditioning in the cabin. One of the other things is that we knew there were 6/6 windows, and so we got some bids from local carpenters to build the windows for us. Came out to $2,000 a window. And obviously the university doesn't think that was a good idea. They were kind of iffy on the investment anyway. The accountants were, the staff and the maintenance people were wild about this project. So what we decided to do, and this is what I've done on another log cabin, these are what are called barn sashes. We ordered them through Menards. They were built, they actually come in these just single sets of windows. So we ordered them, and they're roughly 50 bucks a piece. So what I did is they took them to the carpentry shop over here, and they reworked them and made them into double pane sash windows. So what would have cost us about $2,000 a piece ended up costing us about $150. So it was a good deal all the way around. It shows sort of it kind of ties back to the frugalness of our ancestors, making do with what they've got. Another problem we had, as I told you, we had to replace about 30% of the logs. And logs aren't cheap. In fact, if you ever have one of these on your property and you have to get rid of it, try to sell the logs. Can you imagine a log this long of solid walnut or cherry? Woodworkers are gonna pay through the nose. Give you an example. The cheapest we could get are these logs here. They're oak, solid oak logs, and we had to use them green. They were $2,000 a piece. So we bought, I think 4 or 5. We ended up having to cut some of them down, but we put the long ones in, and then took the ones that were here that were damaged, cut them up, and used them in other places. And there was a lot of reuse of log. We were switching logs around. It was like trying to put a puzzle back together without instructions. Okay? A couple of interesting things we learned while we were doing that. One is this big log right here. We believe that was salvaged from a covered bridge. Because if you go underneath, you can see where the attachments to it are not straight like you would find in a normal building, but actually attached in an arch. And that would have been, we believe, would have been a covered bridge. So there's a lot of different buildings that went into making this. It's kind of cool. It has a bit of a history of it itself. The other interesting thing, we were really afraid of insects. And so, if you'll notice, there's a lot of pock marks here. And you can really see them on the inside. Here and up there. And we're thinking bugs. So the university, of course, because they may deal with dangerous chemicals, they bring out an exterminator. And they wanted to look at this to be sure that there isn't any active infestation. So the guy gets his pocket knife out. He goes over to the log structure and he pokes in a little bit and he digs something out. And you're thinking, oh, it's a bug larvae or something like that. It's a shotgun pellet. These are all, somebody was using this building for target practice. And in fact, if you get up here real close and look at some of these holes, you can still see the lead shot. I bet there's a story connected with that. Ken was telling me that the guy who owned it when it was by the bank used to use it as a gambling area where he'd go with his friends to play poker. And I've always wondered if one of the games got a little wild. Somebody was caught cheating or something. So anyway, we reshaped the doors, we reshaped the windows, we put a new roof on it, we rechinked it. They put a blackboard in it. We're going to put Wi-Fi into it and electricity. They're going to have water somewhere nearby so that they can use it, but not in the building itself. We will not have indoor plumbing. For those of you that are nostalgic for the old days, we're not going to have outdoor plumbing either. Okay? The next question is, how do we make this whole side of campus more usable? And so we went through about a dozen different plans for this area here. And what we were going to do, and what we're still doing, is that we wanted to restore this with native trees and native plants. Because the majority of stuff that you look around as you drive into the country is not native to Kentucky. It came from somewhere else. And in fact, if you took Daniel Boone and you threw him in those trees over there, he would think he was lost. Because he probably didn't recognize half the trees he's looking at. So we were going to redo this whole area with native prairie and native trees. I especially like dogwoods myself. But anyway, they looked at this and they had it all planned out. And then, what I understand, we were going to have this part here was going to be a garden, which would have native Kentucky plants, heirloom garden. And so, as it happened to, and unfortunately, I'm drawing a blank on the name, there was a student here who was very active as a volunteer who passed away and was very into the property and the nature and native plants and restorations of wetlands and things like that. And that poor student died of cancer. And the family donated money to create this spot. So actually, these raised beds can be used by people in the community to grow heirloom seeds and vegetables. And we hope to be able to expand that onto the future. But right now, see this area over here that's now clear and looks like a big mud pit? That's going to be a restored native prairie. So some of the grasses and some of the plants that your ancestors saw when they came here, you'll be able to see there. And the whole idea is to make this part of the university again. So they're even talking about putting sculptures from the art department, doing biological testing areas where students in the biology and the sciences can come out and talk about rainfall and water runoff and all the important things that we're talking about now, and ways to avoid using harsh chemicals and how we can use nature to defend nature, to keep the bugs and the animals in such a way by growing what was here already. So there's a lot of learning that's going to take place in this spot. Over the next couple of months, or hopefully sooner than that, we plan to put in a stone handicap accessible walkway right here to extend from that gravel to a ramp that will go up. In front, the university owns land to the, let me see, that's west, so it's south of here. They own quite a bit of land. Actually, they own land. They tell me about the same amount as they own here in the university campus. They own land south of the university. And there's a whole bunch of building foundations, stone foundations from the farms that used to be there. They're going to take the stone and not only build the ramp here, but they're going to put a stone staircase in the front so that it'll be handicap accessible, and it will be accessible to the public when they want to use it. In addition to that, I've talked to them and I've given them plans. The carpentry department is going to build benches so that there will be benches in here that people can come in and sit, classrooms or whatever. The entire project has really been made possible by the administration at the university, who has decided, even at the point of the lean years that we're going through right now, that this was worth being saved and worth being put together. And you'd be amazed how many departments and programs have expressed an interest in using this cabin. We're very, very excited about it, and very excited about having it part of the inventory again. I can't wait till this fall. We can actually start decorating a little bit, putting up a wreath, maybe putting up some lights at Christmas time. I hope to be able to put some sort of Christmas tree in the window so that people want to come and see it. But also, rather than being the eyesore that it once was, it's now where people want to come to get their pictures taken during graduation. All those things to help make this important. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'll answer any questions you have, but I want to make one point, because you guys are like me, you're in the history business, otherwise you wouldn't be here. History is important only if people know about it. And don't expect, because it's really important to you and you know about it, that everybody's going to know about it. So you got to make people aware of history. Make them understand how important this is, not only to you, but to your community. Because history tells us who we are. And without our history, we're just like everybody else. Thank you.
Anybody have a question?
Yeah, I just, did this have a fireplace? This cabin?
Well, there's a couple of things that we've been speculating about. Originally, this was a story and a half, and it was part of another building. But we don't know anything about that other building because all we have is one photograph of it. We think that that window over there probably had a fireplace on that far entry, because the logs that were there, and they've been replaced now, were different, and there was actually where you could see where they had been joined together, where they had been cut off, and then another log put in place as a sister log. So we think if there was a fireplace in this building, it was on that end. Unfortunately, when I brought it up to the university, they kind of laughed at me.
Well, you know, if it's late enough, they could have had like a wood burning wood stove.
Yeah, wood stoves, although they had them from the very earliest 1800s, they really don't become real popular until the 1840s because they're much more efficient. So yes, this building could certainly have had that, but we can't find any evidence of anything at all like that. So it's a good question.
And the pegs, could they have been for hanging clothing?
They could have. The one peg where we found the artifacts was actually on the outside. So there was they could have been used for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And probably clothing is as good as any idea that anybody else has come up with.
Kind of tool on the outside.
Well, there's also, it's like the log down here, the one that came off the covered bridge. You made do with what you had.
Yeah.
So if, let's say, a windstorm came through and damaged the log, or there was insects in it, they just might go over to a wrecked log cabin and bring it over and flip it over, or whatever they needed to make it. This actually is called a steeple notch. Steeple notch is good for the middle of the 19th century. Before that, they had dovetail notches.
Yeah.
So this building had been 1820s or so, it would have probably had a dovetail notch. And this comes along in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s kind of stuff. And then they go to a different kind of a saddle notch. There's all, and it depends on where you are in the country and what your ethnic background is. Because you go to northern Wisconsin, and you had people building log cabins in the 1890s, German immigrants, because that's what they're used to in Eastern Germany.
Well, there is a TV show on, I don't know if any of you ever saw it, Barnwood Builders. Because that's really they're so passionate about saving them for another 200 years.
I can see, you know, there was always, I always heard the story when I was growing up, that the pioneers came out and they built a log cabin, you know, overnight, or they built it in one day and moved in. My hell.
Yeah.
I worked on a 2-story log cabin in Chillicothe, Ohio. It took us a good 6 months with heavy moving equipment. It just, you can't do it. It just, I mean, a log like this, right here, 1,500 pounds.
Yeah.
There's no way you're going to get that up with brute strength. You're going to need horses and tackle and everything. So, sorry I get off on that.
The end touch on that was modern
Oh, yeah.
machinery.
Yeah.
That's not viewed like the other logs
They're
as you go up
actually,
on them.
none of them, what these are, a lot of these,
It's on fire.
this, you know, these are, we did this with an axe to make it look like it, but they were cut. Just because, you know, we burned out a lot of saws cutting through oak.
Yeah.
That
Well,
thick.
you got some up there that look like they were hewed though.
Yeah, these, oh yeah, some of these are, yeah, they're huge. But what they do is, and they come through with a broad axe, and you know, logs are kind of typically round. They chop them like that, and then come back with a cut down, and that gives you that look. Like I said, this is the third cabin I've worked on. I tell you, it's not for the, I mean, it's not for the old. I'm 54 years old, and this kind of gets to me. Yes, sir.
First, a comment is you guys were restoring it, but the uses you have planned for it, that sounds great. I hadn't heard about that. I think that's wonderful. So thank you from that. I would love to have had a place like this in college to have a class in there. That'd be perfect. But you said, I agree that history doesn't matter if nobody knows about it. Do you have a Facebook page or any promotion about this that we can share and let people
About
know?
this log cabin? Not yet. It's not officially done. And so there's a few things I want done to it before we make it official.
Okay.
I was hoping that this spring we would have had a ribbon cutting. I'm not even sure we're going to make it this fall. The budget cuts have been really deep. They lost 4 people out in the carpentry shop this 2 months ago. And so it's been a worry.
Well, even an update of the project would have been nice, but yeah, I can understand getting it done, so that's a good thing.
Well, we consider the Campbell County Historical Society family, so you know we'll let you guys in on anything.
Well, we'll share some pictures of the meeting of it tonight.
Okay.
So
And I can share with you if you give me an email. I can send them to you or something, but I can show you the before pictures. You'll be surprised.
we'll be glad
Really
to.
surprised.
You've been documenting everything
Oh yeah,
you've done.
everything. In fact, when we had the chinking out, it was so fragile. The university stopped my students from working on it because they were afraid it was going to fall, and so they had to come in and they had to put up big 2x12s up the sides in order to keep it from collapsing on my students. There were a couple of students I wouldn't have mind. I was just teasing. They worked very hard. Any other questions?
Is it normal that the chinking is that wide?
Yes. Actually, what you'd expect to find in an original log cabin like this is that first of all they go in and they fill it with rocks and stones and whatever you have. There are even old dishes and whatever they've got just to fill the hole. And then they come back with this mortar. And the way the mortar is supposed to be laid, if you notice that there's an edge here and then it's smooth at the bottom. So when the water comes down, it's supposed to flow over the logs rather than going into the log itself. But this is the way it was, and with this width is quite normal, especially if you were able to pack it really well with clay or whatever you had to pack it with. You'd be surprised the stuff you find inside these log cabins. I found cabins that friends of mine have worked on. They found guns, you know, old unworkable guns. I found a chamber pot inside one time. I found actually behind the mantle in one of these a whole bunch of tintype photographs because they had fallen behind the mantle. I was actually working with a guy who was tearing the building down, and I was working for the Historical Society and I was approaching him to buy the mantle over the fireplace because I can use those in exhibits and I can use them for, you know, people use them for restoration and I can always get it to the society and save it because I couldn't save the building. And we pried this mantle off. and he charged me 25 bucks for it. All these tintype photographs fell out, but also vintage baseball cards. And he grabbed all the vintage baseball cards, went down to, there was a card dealer that deals in baseball cards. He said he made $1,100 just on those baseball cards. You never know what you're going to find in places like this. Anyway, I think Ken's got some things he wanted to add.
Talking about logs, the story I've always heard is the smaller the log, it was made by an Englishman. The larger log was made by a German. English were lazy. The Germans always got the biggest thing they possibly put together. That's the story I've always heard about
I
logs.
think that's the tale. I would say a wider log was the earlier cabins because you had bigger trees.
Absolutely,
And as
yeah.
they come down, you had smaller logs because the trees were smaller. It was first growth trees.
Very true.
Well, part of this one is, because this is one of the replacement logs, and of course this log is going to cost us $2,000. And it's straight. We couldn't have got anything anywhere straight, or, you know, we'd have to mortgage the university to buy, you know, walnut logs that size.
Okay, well, briefly I'll talk about the history of the cabin and myself. In the 70s, my brother and I researched our family tree, and we went back to France in 1670 and found information. And somehow my brother's newspaper got wind of it, and I ended up in the newspaper with my son on my tractor. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this guy shows up on my side porch one day and introduces himself, says he's Russ Stevens. He had no idea who the man was. Obviously a well-educated man, and he said that he had a 300-acre farm back the road from me on Wolf Road, and that Mary Boone Bryan had been buried on his farm, and he became interested in local history. So that began a 25-year relationship with that man. Russ was an extremely interesting individual, hard to deal with at times, very well educated. He was a mechanical engineer. He had his own mechanical engineering company in Newport. Several of his clients were with NASA. He had his own airplane, 300 acres of Grand Slick. He owned a big place in Florida. So he was used to getting his own way. And usually he had the money to do it. So he became interested in, I told him I was interested in a log cabin. So he had an idea that we should start and put a series of cabins at A.J. Jolly and make it into a place like Sharon Woods has. This is the plans for it in 1978. So we went out there and trying to find log cabins. Well, at that time, the Alexander Bank was being rebuilt, and there was a log cabin behind it. The Gosney cabin had been moved there by Mr. Turner, and the story I've always heard is that he told his wife that it was a place to change their clothes in because he was going to swim in the lake, but it actually was for playing cards. It's about it. So when the bank was being renovated, this log cabin was in the way. Russ Stevens had lots of money and lots of influence. He talked the contractor into coming there with 2 bulldozers and a flatbed tractor trailer. They picked the ends of the building up, sat it on the tractor trailer, and carted it off to the park. And that's what was the beginning of what he was going to have as an entire village out there. So then he took down another cabin over to White's Tower in Kenton County, which is the one that I have. But it was never rebuilt. It was laying out there. In the process of doing all this, he tried to find funding. He wanted the Gupser's Mill to be moved there. He was in disarray. He couldn't get funding. It was one of the few things in his life he couldn't buy on his own, and he did not happen. So this building sat there for a long time. It was in terrible condition. It wasn't being taken care of. My building that I eventually got was being used for firewood by the campers. So I asked the county for leftover logs. In their great wisdom, the county gave it to me. Brought it over in dump trucks, dumped it out, broke the ends off almost every log I got. So it was almost all ruined. So that's where I have extra windows in my cabin too, because I had to piece logs together because I didn't have enough logs to do it. So I eventually found another cabin that was going to be used, and I put those 2 together to make mine. So this one here sat at the park. Nothing was going on with it. It sat there in terrible shape, and it was all boarded up. And that's when Dr. Claypool approached me, and he wanted a building that would look like a one-room school. I had many arguments with that man, telling him that this was never a school, it was never intended to be a school, and don't say out front, which it does, that it was a one-room schoolhouse. It was never a school. And I told him I want nothing to do with this project if you're going to put the schoolhouse in front, because it was never a school. Well, he twisted my arm eventually, and we all came to an agreement, and it got put here. Now, I know the two men who basically put it together were my sister-in-law's brothers. They worked here at the university, they were carpenters, they did the best job they could. At the time, it looked pretty nice. And like you said, then it became an eyesore and started falling apart. And I'm very glad Dr. Hackett took it over, and now it's being preserved. To me, it's having been up and down 27, it's our only mobile log cabin. It's been up and down 27 twice. So, I mean, it's a very unique building. Cabins usually don't get moved that often and saved. So this is a pretty unique place. If anybody would like to see this map, we had all kind of things. The Caldwell Family Cemetery, which was located just a few feet away from this building, is still out in the park. You go out to the festival this weekend on Festival in the Lake. You walk, come into the main entrance there, look to your right, the cemetery's over there. This building sat right next to that building, next to that cemetery is where it sat for several years. So this is an important piece of Campbell County history. It's been moved several times. The Gosney family it's very important to them. So I'm very glad that Dr. Hackett took it on and preserved it. Let's give him a round of applause.
I had a lot of help and a lot of support. It wasn't just me. I had a very supportive university.
And now it's going to be a schoolhouse.
Exactly. Now at least we'll be saying
Whoever's
it's a
in behind the
schoolhouse.
bank, do you mind telling them where it was on Clay Ridge Road? Tell them where it was originally located. Anybody know?
Yeah, it was, there is a big stone mailbox monument type thing, and it says the Gosney on it. That was Uncle Worth's house right there, that log cabin. Well, across, down a little bit south of there is a large pine forest. Used to have a sign up there that said L's Acres, and the cabin was back there.
That is Dr. Shore. Who gave us the Spears Hospital collection?
Sure.
Dr. Shore's place is where this was located then. Dr. Shore got us the Spears Hospital medical collection, which we have as part of our museum now. So it was on his property then. Okay.
And so it was just a home.
Just
People
a home.
lived in it.
Yeah.
Nobody went to school there.
No, there were 51 room schools. There was 3 or 4 schools. Almost all one-room schools were 3 miles apart, so kids could walk to school. They'd walk 3 miles, but that's how they were. There were a whole bunch of them in Grant Slick. There was a Baker log schoolhouse was back the road a short distance from this. Then there was the Clay Ridge School, a Grant Slick School. If you know what Grant Slick Elementary School is today, if you look at the little white house right past the school, that is Grant Slick Elementary, one-room school. It was located in the parking lot over next to the ball field. It was disassembled and moved to the other side, and it was put up to house the custodian who wasn't getting paid much. So they rebuilt the schoolhouse and gave it to him as a place to live in. So there were one-room schools all over Campbell County. This was just not one of them.
I'd like to point out that this cabin was built originally around 1849, before schools became prevalent in Campbell County. The family may have had a tutor come in and teach their children.
Aulick family right down the road from this did have their own schoolhouse on their property, and the building is still back there, up there on Aulick Road.
I think it's safe to say there was education going on here,
Sure.
no matter what. Whether it was clean your room, do your dishes, do your chores, there was an education going on here.
Yeah,
There was
absolutely.
education just moving this thing.
Anybody else have a question?
Did it ever have shutters?
Probably originally, but the shutters that they had made them out of plywood, so we didn't want those. We probably will not put shutters back, just because they're purely decorative. To make them functional would be easy enough, but then you know, what's the use? So, but yeah, it was traditional for them to have shutters for keeping out weather and privacy and that kind of thing. So I would not have been surprised if it hadn't.
The early cabins didn't always have glass.
It's true.
Sometimes they had oiled cloth, oiled paper. They couldn't afford glass. Glass was too expensive.
That was another reason why we went with these, because these are the small panes as opposed to big panes. That's why 6x6 were popular. Yes, sir.
How do you build a log cabin? Is it normal to build it on stone piers? Like
Yes.
this?
It depends on where you are in the country, because this kind of thing is more of a traditional southern approach.
Okay.
Because if you were in the north, you wouldn't want that because your floors would be cold. So we have even talked about just completely putting stone all the way around rather than using these pillars. This would have been fine for someplace in Kentucky, so we're not that upset about it. But yeah, you usually have, because as I told you, the weight is primarily on the corners.
So these piers are sunk into the ground?
Yeah, they're on concrete slabs.
Okay.
And if you'll notice, this one over here is just floating
Uh-huh.
because we really don't need it. But at one time there were 2 logs. There used to be a split, and so they put that in there.
So you lay those and then you set the base?
Yeah.
Put the first 4 logs down.
You ever have Lincoln logs as a kid?
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly how it works.
Okay.
The way you put logs up is you could put a pole on the ground on top of this one and a pole on top of this one. You tie off a rope on this one, put your next log right here, tie the rope around it, and have your mule pull it, and you flop over like this until it ended up on top of the next one. And you did that all the way around with a horse or people. But if it's put up with a log or whatever, a rope or whatever you had to do it with, but it was usually animals, and it was done by poles that laid on top of each one, and you drug them up like that with the animal.
They still do that.
That book you said you
Foxfire books.
Foxfire.
The Appalachian people put out the Foxfire books, and the very first one deals with log cabin building, and that's the one I used to put mine up. Of course, my top log was 22 foot long. It was a foot wide and 18 inches thick, and I had to have a crane for it, and I couldn't do that by hand. The rest of them we did by hand.
It was too much math, but I saw a program one time how to square up.
I had to do it. I just couldn't do that.
Oh yeah, you're right. The people who have put these up were architects
Yes.
and carpenters, because you have to cut and fit perfectly. When we were building a facade of a cabin for an exhibit I worked on one time, and we cut the same log 4 times because you couldn't get the angle right, and you're cutting upside down. You know, because you flip this log in order to cut the V, and then you got to bring it back. So you got to do everything sort of upside down and backwards. So a good carpenter is worth their weight in gold. Yes, sir.
Did you say most of those originals were walnut?
There's some walnut in here. And I'm not an expert on wood, but that's what the restoration expert we asked told us.
I think majority of cabins was whatever tree was available.
Yeah.
But cherry and walnut rot out much faster than oak. And insects love the taste of walnut and not walnut, but cherry and walnut. So they weren't a log of choice. Oak was the choice. Black, red, or white oak.
But this cabin had no oak in it until we put the replacement logs in. There was one pine log in the front, but it was completely gone. We threw that one away.
It's usually whatever was available, because you weren't able to drag them very far.
Some of these might be poplar.
Intention of staying there for any length of time either.
Yeah, now you mentioned poplar. Poplar is not affected by insects at all.
Yeah.
And it's lighter weight. That's why almost all the houses, Bellevue, Dayton, Newport, Cincinnati, lasted so long, is that those logs were poplar. Insects don't eat them. It's like cedar.
I was going to say a lot of things happened after. I mean, pretty soon after this log cabin, they would put siding on it. And in fact, have you ever been to Lincoln's Lincoln's New Salem? It's a village of log cabins. Abraham Lincoln lived there. By the time Abraham Lincoln had lived there in the 1830s, every log cabin had been sided over. But we have such a love affair with log cabins. They've got a mystic kind of feeling to us, that there's something uniquely American about a log cabin, people don't put siding on them anymore. So it's,
Siding protects them, though. It's the very
It
best
does.
thing they could have ever done, because most people didn't take care of them very well. And that clapboard siding protected many a cabin.
yeah, and that's, you know, when the sawmills came,
Yeah.
take advantage of it. But these were permanent structures. They weren't temporary. I mean,
And you
these
were
were,
talking about windows earlier. When I first started teaching in '72, I was working at Cold Spring Elementary School, and they had these giant windows. And I always wondered why they had such big windows in these old buildings. Well, there's a formula. On a cloudy day, the window had to be tall enough that there would be no shadow halfway through the room. So you could stay in a room and be able to read a book on a cloudy day, and enough light would come in that tall window to provide light halfway into the room. That's why they're tall, those great big windows. Bellevue, Dayton, Newport, Cincinnati, all those old buildings, giant windows. That's why there was no electricity. Candles didn't do a good job. So between the daylight, you had to have a giant window and that provide light coming in. There was a formula the state had. All those one-room schools and all those places, there was a formula how tall the window be, how tall. That's why the ceilings are 10 and 12 feet tall, to provide a window that would go up that high, to provide the light that come into the middle of the room. Anybody else have a question? Well, thank you very much for coming tonight.